Initiating launch sequence.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello again. Welcome to Family Church. It's always good to see you guys. I hope you enjoy our time together. This week and for the next 3 sessions, we're going to be looking at a character in the Bible called David. Now, David was all sorts of things. He was a shepherd, he was a giant killer, he was a poet and a musician, and he was somebody who made mistakes. But for some reason, God described him as the kind of man that he wanted. So we can learn a lot from his life. This week we're going to look at how good things come in small packages, and also how people can be jealous when we do well. So let's start with an overview of David's life.
This is David. David is legendary. He was a king in Israel and ruled for 40 years. As a kid, God helped him defeat a giant named Goliath using a single stone and a slingshot. He also fought off a lion and a bear, all by himself. So he was basically a champion fighter. But David wasn't just a tough guy. He was also a poet. He wrote lots of the Psalms. That's a book of songs and poems in the Bible. David was so great that God said he was a man after his own heart, which basically means God thought David was a lot like him. But David wasn't perfect. Far from it. David lied and made big mistakes and even had people killed. His mistakes caused a lot of problems for the Israelites. But even though David was very far from being perfect, God used his family to be the one that Jesus would be born into. God loved David. Failures, successes, good things, and bad. And David loved God too.
Well, that's the overview that you've seen. But of course, there's always a sting in the tail, isn't there? Because Morton decided that he wanted to do a quiz to see if you've been watching that. So I'm going to let him, and it shouldn't be too difficult. Over to you, Morton.
Right, here we are, ready for the quiz. First question. How many years was David king for? 10, 20, 500, 631? Do you remember? Shout it out at the television. It was 40. Question 2. What was the name of the giant that David defeated? Algernon? Arbuthnot? No, of course it wasn't. It was, shout it out, Goliath. Question 3. What animals did David defeat when he was looking after the sheep? Rabbits? Hamsters? No. It was what? It was the lion and the bear. Yeah. And final question. What were the poems that David wrote called? I didn't say that very well, did I? What were the poems that David wrote called? That's right, they were the Psalms. If you got 4 out of 4, give yourself a pat on the back. If you got less than 2, hang your head in shame. Bye.
The one thing we don't really talk about much is that David was not very tall. Compared to King Saul, who was probably about 2 meters tall, or 6'6" in old money, David was quite tiny. And compared to Goliath, who was well over 7 feet tall, David was microscopic. But that isn't all that matters, is it? Because big isn't always the best. If you're trying to lose weight, then being big isn't a good thing at all. If you're trying to slim down and be healthy, then big is not a good thing at all. A mobile phone isn't good if it's too big for you to carry, is it? So a big mobile phone like the one in this picture isn't really very mobile. Big isn't good when it's a mobile phone. And if you're a tall man in a small house, then you need to make accommodation for yourself by putting a hole in the ceiling. I remember my dad used to have to stoop under every doorway that he walked through because he was 6'3", and the houses that we lived in were only 6 foot tall, the doors. So big isn't always best. Little things can be really precious, and obviously diamonds are the obvious precious small things. Most gems, sapphires, rubies. But in human terms, a baby is the most little precious thing that I can think of, because we look at a baby and we think this is wonderful. We want to cuddle it and look after it, don't we? And little things can make a big impact. So giving someone a hug can really change their day and give them a really happy day. If you encourage somebody, maybe you just tell them how much they mean to you or how they're doing a good job. It can really change the way they feel. And of course, little things that make a big impact are celebrated all over the world. A worm can move a stone. A bee can sting a bear. A fly can fly anywhere it wants, because flies don't care. A sparrow can make a happy home in a hut, and a flea can bite the bottom of the most important person in the world and get away with it. I feel a song coming on.
They laugh at me, these fellas, just because I am small. They laugh at me because I'm not 100 feet tall. I tell them there's a lot to learn down here on the ground. The world is big, but little people turn it around. A worm can roll stone, a bee can sting a bear, a fly can fly around beside 'cause flies don't care. A sparrow in a hat can make a happy home. A flea can bite the bottom of the boat in Rome. Goliath was a bruiser who was tall as the sky, but David threw a right and gave him one in the eye. I never read the Bible, but I know that it's true. It only goes to show what little people can do. A worm can roll stone, a bee can sting a bear, a fly can fly around beside the flies don't care. A sparrow in a hat can make a happy home. A flea can bite the bottom of the boat in Rome. So listen here, Professor, with your head in the cloud. It's often kinda useful to get lost in a crowd. So keep your universities, I don't give a damn. For better or for worse, it is the way that I am. Be careful as you go, 'cause little people grow. And little people know when little people fight. We might look easy pickings, but we got sand bites. So never kick a dog, because it's just a pup. You better run for cover when the pup grows up. And we'll fight like sweaty armies and we won't give up. A
So little things can be quite important, especially a flea. Now, David was very little, but he did some amazing things, and we're going to hear about them later. But some of the things that he did made big, tall King Saul very jealous. And jealous means that you want something that somebody else has. And because you can't have it, you get very angry. So let's catch up with the story and see what happens.
God's story, David and Saul. So part of God's story is about two guys named David and Saul, and it begins like this. You may have heard of David before, the little shepherd boy who stood up to the massive warrior Goliath and won. But that isn't the whole story. In fact, that's really only a part of it. The rest of the story starts with a man named Saul. See, God wasn't very happy with Saul, Israel's first king. The people of Israel had begged God's prophet Samuel to give them a king so they could be more like other nations. God warned the Israelites they would regret it, but gave them Saul as their king. And like anyone, King Saul wasn't perfect and soon started to mess up, disobeying God and leading Israel away from him. And that's where our friend David comes in. God wanted a new king to replace Saul, so he sent Samuel to a man named Jesse. Jesse showed Samuel his eldest sons, big and strong men. Samuel thought for sure that one of these impressive boys was to be king, but God had other plans. God told Samuel to find another son, so Jesse brought in little David. Even though David was a little scrawny and had the smelly job of taking care of sheep, God told Samuel to look at more than his appearance. Samuel obeyed and anointed David, God's special way of choosing people. When David was anointed, the good spirit that had been helping Saul rule left him and was replaced with a new spirit that wouldn't leave him alone. Imagine there was a bee buzzing around in your brain that you couldn't do a thing about. That may be what it was like for Saul. Since Saul was going a little crazy, his servants had David, a great harp player, come to the palace and play music to calm the king. Now, one day, David came to bring his brothers, who were working as soldiers, some lunch. What started out as a lunch delivery soon turned into one of the most famous stories in the Bible, where tiny David took down the massive warrior Goliath with a single stone. After this, David was like a famous rock star. In fact, David was so popular that Saul worried people would start thinking David should be king instead. Saul began to try and kill him, sending him on dangerous quests where any normal guy would have died, and even threw a spear at his head once. Eventually, things got so bad that Jonathan, Saul's son, who David had become great friends with, helped David escape. David wandered for years trying to stay out of Saul's grasp. Twice, Saul even got so close that David had the opportunity to kill him. But David refused to kill the king in charge. David continued to flee from Saul for years, and without God's blessing, Saul's army was losing to the Philistines. Soon enough, Saul's army had been defeated. Jonathan had died, and the Philistines were now chasing them. Saul was so afraid of capture that he chose to fall on his own sword instead of letting the Philistines catch him. When David heard of Jonathan and Saul's death, he went out and avenged them. And with Saul dead, David returned to Israel and at last took his place as God's new king. And that's the story of David and Saul. So, in case you missed it, here's the quick version. God made Saul king. Saul disobeyed God. God said he would take the kingdom away from Saul and chose David. David became popular. Saul became fearful of David. David had to run away. David wandered for years. Saul died. David avenged Saul. David took over as Israel's chosen king. And that's a part of God's story.
Well, King Saul was jealous of David. I wonder who you are jealous of. Let's have a think. What about people who are stronger than you? Don't you wish you had stronger muscles and could do amazing feats of strength? I do. What about people who are better looking than you? I'd like to not wear glasses, and I'd like to be a foot taller, and I'd like to have dark hair instead of grey hair. In fact, yeah, I could be quite jealous of people who are better looking. Oh, and people who are healthier than me. Absolutely. Wouldn't it be great if you never had to worry about coronavirus or bad things happening to you, or your breathing, or your spots, or your feet? Just think, if you're healthy all the time, it'd be wonderful. Other people seem to be. And isn't it unfair that some people have more money than us? Don't you get jealous of people who can spend as much as they want, whether it's on sweets or on houses? They make me quite jealous. This one is a big problem, isn't it? What if people have got nicer friends than yours? I don't like that idea. My friends are wonderful, but some people are jealous because they don't have nice friends. What about people with more interesting parents? You see, my parents just worked and came home, and we went on holidays, and nothing very exciting. But some people have parents who are rocket scientists and pilots and explorers. Are you jealous of those sort of people? And some people have a better house than mine, and we get jealous of them having 5 bedrooms instead of 4, or 6 bedrooms instead of 5, or 2 bathrooms instead of 1. It's all a bit silly, really, isn't it? You see, when Saul got jealous of David, he forgot all the good things he already had. He forgot that he was king. He forgot that he could do anything he wanted. He forgot that he got people who liked him. He wanted more. And of course, you can never have everything that you want, can you? I wonder what you've already got. I've got a family, and I've got friends, and I've got a place to live. I've got loads of good things. What have you got, though? You think about it. And I just wonder, if you did get more, would it make you happy? Because wanting something and not having it, and getting jealous because you don't, can make you into a horrible person, just like Saul became. So I think the best advice that we can have is to enjoy what we have, enjoy what God's given us, and enjoy the person that God made us to be, and just be the best person that we can be, and enjoy what we do. Christine's going to tell us a story now before we finish, and then we're going to play out with a slightly different song about David. See you next time. Bye for now. Oh, I forgot to tell you about the characters in the story. There's Slowcoach the tortoise, Speedy Gonzales the hare, and Aslan the lion.
Hello again. Now you've just seen the pictures of the 3 animals in our story today. We have Speedy Gonzales the hare, we have Slowcoach the tortoise, and Aslan the lion. Now Aslan the lion is the king of the animals, and Aslan decided that he had a very important job that needed doing. It was to take a message a long way to a very important person. Now, what he decided to do was advertise the job. So he advertised the job, and both Speedy Gonzales the hare and Slow Coach, the tortoise, saw the job advertised, and they decided, both of them separately, that they really wanted the job. So they applied to the king with a lot of other people. And the king looked at all the applications and he thought, which ones? And he decided that he really didn't know which one to choose, but two of them stood out to him. One, you've got it, Speedy Gonzales. Two, Tortoise the hare. Slow Coach the tortoise. So he thought to himself, well, how can I decide between these two? Because really, I don't know. So what he did was he sent them a letter and he said, I would like you to come and be in a race, because I want to choose which is the best one for the job. Who is going to manage to get my message over to where it needs to be? This is a very important message. So what he did was he summoned his one of his courtiers and he said, right, I've told Speedy Gonzales, the hare, and Slow Coach, the tortoise, to come tomorrow for a race, and we'll see which one wins the race to see who's going to take my special message. So the man who was chosen met Speedy Gonzales and Slow Coach on the starting line. And he said, right, guys, are you ready? On your marks, get set, go. And before you knew it, there was Speedy Gonzales going over the horizon. And Tortoise, Slow Coach, the tortoise, started plodding, plod, 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 plod. And he seemed to be very, very slow, but he just kept going. He just kept going. Now, Speedy Gonzales, who was a very proud man and who thought he knew how to do everything and was sure he was going to win the race, he came over the hill and he thought, I'm going to have a bit of a game here. He said, I'm going to lie behind this hill, and when Slow Coach comes along, I'm going to say, I'm here. And when we do that last bit, I'm just going to zoom to the end and I'm going to win. So he put his head back and he put his hands behind his back and his legs up in the air. Guess what? He fell fast asleep, would you believe? Slow Coach, on the other hand, kept plod, 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 plodding, totally unaware of what Speedy Gonzales was doing. Plod, 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 plod. Plod, 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 plod. If I'm right for this job, I'll win. Plod, 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 plod. But it doesn't look like I'm going to win because Speedy Gonzales is so fast. But still, I'm not going to give up. Plod, 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 plod. And he came to the place, without realizing, beside where Speedy Gonzales had actually fallen fast asleep. And he heard that funny noise. He thought, what on earth's behind that hill? Anyway, he kept going, plod, 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 plod. And now he could see the finish line, but he couldn't see Speedy Gonzales. He thought, oh, well, Speedy Gonzales must have won. Never mind, I'm going to keep going. So plod, 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 plod. And as he went over the line, there was a crowd of people, and they shouted, "Hooray! Hooray! Slow coach, you've won." Slow coach looked round, and there was Speedy Gonzales coming down the hill, because he woke up with a start and suddenly realized what had happened. And guess what? Slow coach got the job. See, what you see isn't always what you get. And actually, Slow coach was the best man for the job because he stuck at it. And he took the message for the king, Aslan the lion.
D to the A to the V-I, D to the A to the V-I-D, D to the A to the V-I, D to the A to the V-I-D. To the V-I-D, D to the A to the V-I, D to the A to the V-I-D. David was a king, loved to dance and he loved to sing. He danced and sang aloud. God's love made him dance and shout. David was a king, loved to dance and he loved to sing. He danced and sang aloud. God's love made him dance and shout. D to the A to the V-I, D to the A to the V-I-D, D to the A to the V-I, to the A to the V-I-D, D to the A to the V-I-D. It's a K to the I to the N to the G. All his life he loved G-O-D. Showed him how to live free, free. David made a mess, knew what he did and then confessed, changed his ways. God forgave him on that day. David made a mess, knew what he did and then confessed, changed his ways. God forgave him on that day. D to the A to the V-I, D to the A to the V-I-D, D to the A to the V-I, D to the A to the V-I-D, D to the A to the V-I-D. As a K to the I to the N to the G. All his life he loved G-O-D. Showed him how to live free, free. David had a heart that loved the Lord from the start, with a heart for the Lord. You are who God adores. David had a heart that loved the Lord from the start, with a heart for the Lord. You are who God adores. D to the A to the V-I, D to the A to the V-I-D, D to the A to the V-I, D to the A to the V-I-D. We're all like David, we all need God to help us out. We need His love, we need Him to spell it out. D to the A to the V-I, D to the A to the V-I-D, D to the A to the V-I, D to the A to the V-I-D, D to the A to the V-I-D. Was a K to the I to the N to the G. All his life we loved G-O-D. Showed him how to live F-R-E-E, F to the R to the E-E, 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 F to the R to the E-E.